Hello, this will be a demonstration of the dirndl skirt. The dirndl is a full skirt gathered to a waistline and held by means of a waistband, elastic, or drawstring. Opened up, the dirndl skirt is simply a rectangle of fabric. To prepare, the muslin should be the desired length of the skirt plus 2 inches above the waistline for play and at least 2 inches for the hemline. In the width is determined by the design of the garment, the weight of the fabric, and the cost factor. In many cases, 1 full width of fabric will be used for the front of the skirt and 1 full width will be used for the back. For a slimmer skirt, 1 full width of fabric might suffice for the entire skirt. In georgette or chiffon, 3 full widths might be employed for a very full skirt. There are also instances where 1.5 widths or 2.5 widths will be used, in which case there will be a seam on each side of the skirt and 1 in the center back. A center front seam is hardly ever used. Sometimes the skirt is cut on cross grain for a rounder look or to take advantage of a border print, as in this example. The muslin skirt is cut on straight grain and gives a softer look over the hip line. To prepare the muslin, measure in 1 inch from the edge of the muslin and drop a straight grain line. This will be the new center front. From the top of the muslin, measure down 2 inches for a waistline point. From the waistline point, measure down 7 inches for a hip line. Indicate the hip line with a straight cross grain marking. Now decide on the width of your skirt from center front to center back and indicate that on the muslin. And true a straight grain line. This is center back. Allow 1 inch seam allowance beyond the center back. Now divide center front to center back in half to find the side seam. Drop a straight grain line. Now divide center front to side seam in half and from the hip line up, true in straight grain. Do the same thing from center back to side seam. And the muslin is ready for draping. To prepare the form, take a styling tape and pin from center front to center back along the hip line, which is 7 inches below the waistline. Now here's a guide for balancing the fullness around the skirt as we go from center front to center back. Measure from center front to side seam along the hip line and put a pin at that halfway point, just above the tape along the hip. Do the same thing at the waistline, dividing center front to side seam in half. Put a pin as a guide. Repeat this procedure for the back. These will correspond to those halfway points on the muslin. Now we're ready to drape. Bend back the muslin at center front. And pin to the figure. Pinning first at center front, waistline and hip line. Pin the side seam to correspond with the hip line. And center back. Now pin the halfway point of the front muslin to the halfway pin at hip line and waistline. Repeat that in the back. Now with a piece of 1/4-inch elastic or styling tape, pin just beyond center front, around the waistline, and pin past the center back to anchor the waistline fullness into place. Now with fingers and the pin, distribute the fullness evenly within each section. Always making sure that the hip line of the muslin and the hip line of the figure are matching. When the fullness is evenly distributed from center front to center back, dot the waistline of the figure. When the waistline is dotted, remove the muslin and place on the table. dots must be connected to achieve a smoothly blended waistline. The hip curve can be used for this operation. It's not necessary to catch every dot, as this was done by freehand, and you did not necessarily get a smooth line that way. Now this has been draped without a side seam. If a side seam is needed, the side seam on the muslin can be slashed and 1 inch of seam allowance can be added to each side. After transferring both sections to new blocks of muslin or paper, the waistline is then trimmed away to 1 inch seam allowance. And it should be noted that the waistline rises over the side seam to accommodate the fullness of the hip line. Now, one final step before we replace the muslin back on the form, and that is to put 2 rows of shirring stitches just above the finished waistline. That will help in gathering the skirt to the desired waistline measurement. And here on the form is the finished dirndl skirt. The hem has been pinned into place and a waistband has been added. In this variation, the dirndl skirt is attached to the fitted hip yoke. The style line of the yoke will fall somewhere below the waistline and above the hip line. Prepare the form by pinning styling tape from center front to center back for the desired shape of the yoke. 2 pieces of muslin should be blocked and pressed. They should be longer and wider than the design area, with 4 inches extra in both length and width. Pin the front yoke piece to the figure at center front, making sure there is enough play above the waistline, below the style line, and beyond the side seam. Slash from the top of the muslin down to the waistline, going from the center front towards side seam. Smooth the muslin along the waistline to side seam, being sure to allow a pinch of ease. I can clip some of this away. Before you anchor the side seam at the hip line level, make sure again that there is a pinch of ease along the bottom of the style line. And then pin beyond the side seam. Dot along the waistline from center front to side seam. Cross mark side seam and waistline point. Mark the side seam to the bottom of the styling tape and cross mark. Dot back to center front. At the halfway point, that is halfway between center front and side seam, give one mark for balance in shirring the dirndl skirt. Remove the muslin from the figure. And true. Allow 1/2 inch seam allowance along the style line. Allow 1 inch seam allowance at the side seam. Allow 1 inch seam allowance at the waistline. Repeat this procedure for the back, and when you have the back and front finished, pin together at side seam. The only difference in the back is at the halfway point there will be 2 cross marks or 2 notches instead of 1. At the side seam at approximately the halfway point, give a notch so that when the sample maker joins the yokes, she is sure that she is joining properly. Pin the joined yokes front and back to the figure. Pinch of ease at the waistline, both front and back. Pinch of ease at the style line, both front and back, and you are ready to drape the skirt portion of this particular variation. Place the muslin for the dirndl skirt over top of the yoke, which has been pinned to the figure. Distribute and balance the ease evenly as you did for the basic dirndl skirt. Make sure the hip lines are matching from the form to the muslin. When all of that is done, dot the bottom of the style line through from the yoke to the skirt portion of this garment. Make sure to transfer the halfway point. When you have dotted the style line from front to back, remove the muslin from the form. As with the basic dirndl skirt, true the style line, connecting the dots from center front to center back. Allow 1 inch seam allowance. Cut away the excess. Now, at this point, before the skirt is put back on the figure, just as with the basic skirt, you will give 2 rows of shirring just above the waistline. And this is the finished hip yoke dirndl skirt. This is a variation which turns the dirndl skirt into increasingly wider tiers for a soft feminine look. The most important decision here is the number of tiers and their proportion. For instance, in this sketch, the skirt is divided into 3 equal sections. A ruffle has been inserted for style. While in this skirt, the tiers are graduated, with a small tier at the waistline, and the next 2 tiers becoming increasingly longer. In this skirt, only the first tier need be draped to respect the rise of the hip line at side seam. The remaining tiers may be done by flat pattern method on the table. Each tier should be wider than the one previous by no more than 1.5 times, or the skirt becomes too full and too bulky. Now here is a version done on cross grain to show you the difference in the way the grain falls. The cross grain is much stiffer and the skirt has a much fuller look. These are only a few of the possibilities for designing and draping a dirndl skirt.